This is Rock and Roll Roots with Steve Palec.
Hi, this is Steve Palec, the host of Rock and Roll Roots on WKLH, and I appreciate each and every person that listens to it.
There goes the last DJ who plays when he wants to play.
However, I'm going to strongly suggest that, for once, don't listen to me. Listen to Joe K on Play That Rock and Roll.
There goes the last human voice. And there goes the last DJ. And you can check out anytime you want. Just call me Joe. And I can play that rock and roll for you.
This is not a test. This is Play That Rock and Roll Podcast Edition. I'm your host, Joseph K., and like the song at the start says, just call me Joe. Hey, another interview today. Watch me tempt fate. I'm now 3 for 3 on interview requests. I think that's because all three individuals I've had on the show have all been very gracious and generous with their time. For that, I am very appreciative. Our guest today is Steve Palec, who hosts Rock and Roll Roots on Sunday mornings on 96.5 WKLH, and he has hosted that show for over 30 years now. It is the absolute best rock and roll radio show in the Milwaukee market, and honestly, I would stack that show up against any rock show on radio today. Milwaukee is totally lucky to have him, and I was particularly lucky to get him to come on this podcast. The reason I wanted to have him on this podcast is that he recently published his memoirs. About a year ago, I think December 2019, he put out his book, In Awe, Beatles, Baseball, and Bourbon, which is a look back at his career in radio and also commercial real estate, and his life as a lifelong Milwaukeean. I read it earlier this year and I really enjoyed it. Steve's writing style is very accessible and enjoyable, and there's a lot of great rock and roll stories, and there's a lot of great Milwaukee stories. So I thought he would be a great guest to have on the show. In the interview you're about to hear, we discuss what motivated him to write the book and his process for putting the book together. We then dive into a series of topics that are discussed in the book. For instance, his affinity for collecting and drinking bourbon. I'm not someone who's had a lot of bourbon over the years, but Steve has become an absolute expert in that arena, so getting sort of a crash course on how to drink bourbon and which bourbons to select was very interesting to me, and I think you'll have some fun listening to that. After that, we move on to record collecting. Steve has a huge record collection, and he talks about how he's amassed that over the years. We talk about the music of John Prine. If you're not familiar, John Prine is a legendary Nashville country folk singer-songwriter. Sadly, John passed away earlier this year from complications due to COVID-19. He never had a huge big commercial radio hit, but listeners in Milwaukee often get treated to one of his songs on the radio on Sunday mornings because Steve likes to find a spot for John as often as possible, which is a real treat. So hearing Steve talk about why he has such love and appreciation for John Prine's music was really interesting and definitely makes me want to listen to more John Prine music. And finally, we talk about some of the various interactions and interviews Steve has had with some big-name celebrities, from Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, bluesman Willie Dixon, radio broadcaster Steve Dahl, that's the guy behind Disco Demolition Night. We actually talk a little bit about Disco Demolition Night, and HBO's Bill Maher, who is a very controversial figure. Steve actually interviewed him last year, and it was a really cool conversation, so I got to talk to Steve about that. And that really is only scratching the surface of all the good stuff that's found in this book. Truth be told, I had tons of other questions that I wanted to ask Steve, but due to some video glitches with our Zoom connection, I thought it best to not go any further over the time we had scheduled and table those for hopefully next time. If you want to learn more about Steve's book, I would suggest you go over to his website, stevepalec.com, and look it up. There's some book trailers posted there, also on his YouTube page you can find. If you want to learn more about his radio show, go to 96.5 WKLH's webpage for Rock and Roll Roots. And of course, you can follow Steve on social media at Steve Palec on Twitter. And if you live in the Milwaukee area or you have the KLH app, you of course can listen to Steve on the radio Sunday mornings, 9 a.m. to noon, Rock and Roll Roots on 96.5 WKLH. So with that, here is my interview with Steve Palec, author of In Awe, Beatles, Baseball, and Bourbon, and the host of Rock and Roll Roots on 96.5 WKLH here in Milwaukee.
This is Rock and Roll Roots with Steve Palec.
For those who may not be familiar with your work, could you give a brief introduction of In Awe for them?
Sure. I have been lucky enough to have been on the radio for over 45 years, and in the world of business too for about 35 years. So during all those decades, I amassed a lot of stories. And to my amazement, when I really start thinking about how many people I've been privy to have met, and some of them have just been off the charts amazing, and all these little stories that I was compiling, in the back of my mind, I kind of had like a spiral notebook in my head of all these stories, but I didn't know what to do with them. And it got to the point where I realized, I could end up forgetting all these stories. So I started writing them down literally in a spiral notebook. And I really wanted to share them, but I don't want to steal any thunder of any questions you might have about what happens in the motivation of writing a book. But I will tell you this, about halfway through it, I almost scrapped the whole thing and thought, I don't want to just be that guy that's dropping names and telling stories that don't mean anything. And it wasn't in the preparation of the book. It was during the book that I realized that if there's no common thread to this, if there's no theme, then it is name dropping, and what's the point? And I was so lucky that about halfway through the project, I realized what the common thread was. I'm just a normal, average guy that happens to be in all these situations, and the situations come about because that normalcy allows me to just be in awe of how cool all these things are. Not only the really, really cool things like sitting down with a Beatle or with Les Paul, or being on the field at Lambeau, or in a private jet with the commissioner of baseball. I get as much of a thrill from going to McDonald's and getting a double cheeseburger and an egg McMuffin and combining them. And so I realized it was just this common thread of being in awe that really was the motivation for putting all these stories down and then sharing them.
Well, for sure. What was the time frame? When did you decide to actually put it together in a book form?
I actually had that spiral notebook that I had with me for about 2 or 3 years. And so there was an inkling of a book in there. But what really happened and what got me to actually sit down and do it was my wife, because she decided to write a book. And I thought, well, if we're not going to talk to each other for 8 months, I might as well be doing the same thing she's doing. And so that was really the impetus to actually have it go from concept into, a paperback.
Oh, very cool. That's a better reason to write a book than I saw an interview with Bill Maher, and he, like what how you spoke to him, but his reason for writing a book was cocaine.
Yeah, you know what? I will say this, that when you do write a book at whatever stage, whether it's the inspiration for doing it, the path you take to do it, or even when you're nearing the finish line, there's a cliche, and boy, cliches are true for a reason. And this was one that I found to be really the cornerstone that anyone should consider when you think about writing a book. Don't ever, ever write a book for the motivation of making money. Write a book because you want to get something out there, or you want to share something, or you have something to say. Never for an instant was my motivation or my illusion about making money or having it made into a movie, who's going to play me, all of those things. I mean, the real motivation is to share something. And look, I don't want to lose money, but, I never really did it for sales.
Well, that's good. Yeah, there's sort of a common thread on that same note for people who get onto YouTube. Because you can make money on YouTube, but it is, like writing a book, I'm sure, very hard. And if you start off with that goal, you're probably not going to make it. You have to start with the goal of presenting something worthwhile. When you were putting the book together, did you read other memoirs or other autobiographies or other books, any writings? Were there other authors that inspired you or maybe gave you some guidance on how to put a book like this together? The one I think of right off the top of my head is this guy's book, Bob Berry's.
It's funny you should mention that, because the real answer to your question is not intentionally. I never was inspired by a book or sought out a book to emulate, but unintentionally there were some things that popped up. For example, I absolutely adored Bruce Springsteen's book. I just thought that was spectacular. There was also a little more of an obscure book. And by the way, for the longest time, I read one book a year. That when I was on vacation, sitting at a pool, it was the only time I ever could bring myself to, read a book cover to cover. And there was one, I was on vacation a little before I kicked this off, that I picked up, and it's kind of an obscure book. There was a concert promoter by the name of Barry Fay out of Denver, who wrote a book about all his memories of all the people that he met and knew in the music industry. And that was really helpful because, again, I wanted to avoid the name-dropping book. Right. A little before I started, I was given Bob Berry's book. And even though our paths had physically crossed a few times, we had never formally met. And I was invited to a dinner. Tom Jarris, former general manager of WKLH and The Hog, great guy, invited my wife and I out to dinner, and had Bob Berry there. So we actually did get to talk, and I read Bob's book. And, here's a guy that I grew up listening to. He was in the presence of the Beatles, all four of them. And, in reading his book, there were a lot of stories there that I enjoyed. But, and I mean this, with total respect to Bob, who I truly admire, I didn't read his book and learn anything about him that could be categorized as, you idiot, that was stupid, what are you doing? And I thought, you know what? If I'm going to do the good parts of that, I'm going to add in the ability for people to see I'm just an ordinary average guy in these great circumstances, and I want people to know how fallible I am.
Yeah, absolutely. That's your story is so humanizing and funny, and that's what makes it so accessible. So in all, Beatles, baseball, and bourbon, you must have done what all publishers like, and you came up with a great title. And
But those three things, would be pretty hard to divorce from my lifestyle.
Right. Well, I got questions about all three, so let's sort of go in reverse order. Let's start with, because I'm not quite a bourbon drinker. I'm more of a beer guy, but I'm not a beer snob, for the record. So for someone who might be like myself, new to bourbon, what are some good entry-level safe bets that you could introduce yourself to that with?
Well, I mean, you've touched upon one of my obsessions in life, so I'm going to take advantage of giving you a long-winded answer to get to your question. The thing about bourbon is that really interests me are the rules around it. Now, bourbon, when you think about it, it's the only true American spirit. Everything else comes from somewhere else. Vodka, wine, tequila, beer. We're talking about all different countries. Bourbon, by its rule, has to be made in America. And it has to be aged in a brand new charred oak barrel. It goes in, again, more rules, 51% corn. It goes in as a clear liquid, and it sits in this barrel for years. As it sits in the barrel, it's expanding and contracting with the weather and the barrel, and it picks up the color, it picks up the taste from the barrel. All these different things lead up to this drink you're about to have. Now, the next thing to understand, most people make the mistake of thinking it's a shot. It's a sipping drink. I know a lot of people take a shot of it and go, oh my God, I can't stand that, and that's it. It's categorized forever. There's something called the Kentucky Chew that everyone should know and do before they try a bourbon, or even after years of drinking it, have it. And that is, you take a little sip, keep it in your mouth, and chew it. Keep it there for about 10 seconds, move it around, and then swallow it. Because at that point, you still haven't tasted bourbon. You are inundated with the taste of alcohol, and your mouth cannot process any other taste. It's slapped in the face by that alcohol. After you do that chew, the next sip that you take will be the first time you're tasting that bourbon. And you will taste, because you're acclimated to it now, you'll taste the caramelized flavors. You'll taste the fact that it's sat in a barrel. And now you just keep sipping it, and all of a sudden, you are tasting more and more, and you have an appreciation for it. That being said, two things to keep in mind to answer your question. One, never just open a bourbon and drink it. Go through that process. The second is that the longer it sits in the barrel, the more flavor and personality that bourbon has. So it has to age for a minimum of 2 years. And there are some cheap bourbons, usually on the bottom shelf, that are aged for 2 years. But to answer your question, there are some go-to bourbons I have that are just spectacular. Eagle Rare, for example, has been aged 10 years, and it's a very, very affordable bourbon. Buffalo Trace, same thing. It comes from the same place. 1792 is one of my very affordable bourbons that I use as a go-to. Jefferson's, any of them, including the one that's a little pricey, but Jefferson's Oceans, is a bourbon that goes through that process of sitting in the barrel, but on a ship that goes around the world. So it's moving around in that barrel. Wow. All of those. Maker's Mark is a great entry-level bourbon. I know a lot of people think about Jim Beam. Regular Jim Beam, sorry, I won't drink it. But Jim Beam Masterpiece, it's called their Master Keepers Edition. It is as good a bourbon. They don't talk about it. It comes in a big wooden crate, and that's why it costs a lot of money. I wish it didn't come in that crate. It's one of the best bourbons I've ever had. So again, there are a lot of entry-level bourbons you could try, but it's much more enjoyable if you know a little, and if you do the chew, and then you buy something that's been aged as much as your entry-level pricing will allow it to be. Sorry, but that, I mean, you tapped into my passion.
No, that's a great answer, because like you said, with the taking a shot, that's probably what I would have done if I was out at the bar, you know? And it's like, you know, so it's almost like the process of how you drink it is as important as what you get.
You're absolutely right. And actually, one of the greatest benefits that came out of my discovery and obsession with bourbon is that I used to drink a lot of beer. I used to drink a lot of sweet drinks. Many of my drinks had umbrellas in them. But when I order a bourbon in whatever setting and I'm sipping it and holding this nice glass, I feel like an adult. It's the first time in my drinking experiences I've ever felt like an adult.
Very, very classy affair. You know, you could feasibly have a cigar, you know, and just, you know, hey, you belong in a magazine. Perfect.
Yeah, right.
Well, very good. I'll take you up on that recommendation. I haven't tried it, so that now that I have that info, I will. Very cool. So, you know, trying to stay on bourbon, but also sort of pivot it back to the music we love. I know you tweeted about it, so I wonder if you tried it. You know, a lot of the bands that you and I both love have, in one way or another, tried to wedge their way into beer distribution or, you know, some sort of booze production. I think of Heaven's Door, you know, Bob Dylan's. And then I also think of probably the granddaddy of all of them, Sammy Hagar's Cabo Wabo Tequila. Have you tried what rock star alcohol types have you tried, and what do you think of them?
Well, Heaven's Door, Dylan's bourbon, is spectacular. It's an excellent bourbon. I can't really profess to, you know, think about a lot of rock star bourbons. And by the way, I only drink bourbon.
Okay. Yeah.
I only ingest 3 liquids: water, coffee, and bourbon. And I didn't set out to do that, and I'm not, you know, that obsessive about it. It works out that way. I will answer your question though, Joe, by saying that I think the key to any endorsements, actually, it's one of my theories about music. And it necessitates one thing: for music to be long-lasting, for it to be accessible for multiple generations. And it's the same thing with brand endorsements. It had better damn well be sincere. So, you know, Dylan's, obsession with his bourbon and his whiskey is sincere. He didn't just slap his name on it. Just the same way that his music wasn't product. When he was writing songs and performing in the 60s, for that music to still be enduring in 2020, it has to come from sincerity. Now, I'll give you an example of an endorsement that truly is sincere, and that's Matthew McConaughey. He endorses Long Branch Bourbon. He's involved with Wild Turkey in a lot of things that they do. And he does it because it's sincere. He really, really likes that bourbon. So I've tried that bourbon and I like it. There's some other really weird ones that actually, if the entity or the person putting their brand or name on it is sincere about it, there's a pretty good chance it's a good bourbon. There's a James T. Kirk bourbon. Oh. And, you know, I bought it for the hell of it. And I'm like, this is great. Terry Bradshaw, the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback, endorses a bourbon. But I'll never forget when I was a sportscaster and totally intimidated and intrigued by all these situations I found myself in. One day, I'm across from Reggie Jackson after a baseball game. And I asked him about his candy bar. And, you know, I said something about, did you lent your name to a candy? He said, young man, I don't lend my name to anyone. I get paid for it. But, you know, what I read between the lines in that was, you know, he was doing it for the money.
Yeah. Oh, man. But that is such a nostalgia bomb for me right there, because I absolutely sold those candy bars as a kid. And I haven't even thought of that name in so many years. That's a blast from the past. But yeah, you know, I mean, that's the whole notion of celebrity endorsements, you know. Like, when it comes to booze, I always think of, like, maybe on that spectrum of, like, credible endorsement and less so. You know, Dan Aykroyd has that Crystal Skull vodka. Yeah. And he truly believes aliens and all that stuff. And I believe whatever he's trying to do with that vodka, that is crazy genuine, you know, and it probably is good. I'd probably try it. And then, yeah. And then on the other end, and I'm not getting into politics at all, but before he was president, Trump had Trump vodka, and he didn't drink, which is just like weird.
Yeah, exactly right.
Let's move on to sports. You know, obviously we're both big Wisconsin sports fans. I'm more of a football guy. My brother's a baseball guy. In fact, he was kind of teasing me about the book. He saw I was reading. He's just like, "Oh, you're getting into baseball, huh?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm working on it." But one of the fun stories in the book is when you first met Aaron Rodgers, quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, and your gift to him was an old school iPod that had all the thousands of songs on it. My first question is, you put that together yourself. What sort of music did you put on there for him?
Well, it was actually a duplication of my iPod.
Oh.
So when the iPod first came out, and it was so lucky for me, I was going on a trip to London, and so I had a pretty long flight, and this was before I discovered that a couple of vodkas and Tylenol PM will get you through a overseas flight a lot easier than trying to tough it out yourself. But I thought, okay, I had gotten an iPod, and so I sat down and I started loading songs into my iPod. I never took an album and just ripped it right into the iPod. I would sort out every song on that iPod was something that had a purpose and a reason I wanted it on my iPod. And I was motivated by the fact that if I put it on shuffle, I would enjoy it. Because, I'll tell you two quick things about being on the radio. One is, I don't care how long it's been since you've had to play an album, you'll still have dreams where the album runs out and you wake up and go, oh my God. The other thing is that you don't hear music the same way as other people because you're always thinking, how long is that song? What's the open to it? How does it end? And what should I follow it with? What do I play? And so to divorce yourself and just enjoy someone else programming all the music, but knowing that you like it all is like having your own little radio station. So that's what I set out to do. And so I had built up this collection on my iPod that got up to about 8,000 songs. That's what I gave Aaron Rodgers. And, so I knew they were all songs that, for me, all meant something and all had, been scrubbed by my taste. But I didn't know, what he would think of it. I just knew that you can't go out and buy an iPod with 8,000 songs on it.
Right. Yeah. Did you ever hear back from him about it?
No, but I did hear from Jason Wilde, who was the guy that got it into Aaron's hands for me. See, I met him. The story goes like this. And it was just a magical evening. Aaron and a handful of people were going to have dinner. And we were up in Kohler. And it was an interesting aside. Olivia Munn dropped him off.
Okay.
But I was told at the onset as we were waiting for Aaron to get there that, he just wants to, and we should, have a dinner with some people, getting to know each other and converse and talk. No photos, no autographs, no stupidity. And I was like, oh no.
Right.
I had a autographed picture personalized from Bart Starr, an autographed picture personalized from Brett Favre. And when I say personalized, I mean with a message, to me.
Yeah.
I thought, what could be cooler than to have a third? Aaron Rodgers, think about those three quarterbacks in one lifetime and then having a spot in my house that had all three of those pictures. So I brought a picture and I thought, I know I'm not supposed to, but I really want to. So in exchange, that's when I brought the iPod as a gift. And, I I kind of like put my arm around one of the guys organizing it, and I said, "Hey, could I?" And he's like, "Steve, we can't make any exceptions." And Jason Wilde was there, who great sports writer, with the Packers every day. They all know him, and he overheard all this. He said, "Steve, I'll get it to Aaron tomorrow." Oh. And so we had a great night. I got to talk to him. It was truly an enjoyable evening. But it was the next day that Jason gave him the iPod and got the photo signed for me. And then when Jason got it back to me, he told me, "Oh, yeah, Aaron loved it." But I don't know, that's about 8 years ago. So for all I know, it could have got thrown away the next day.
Well, maybe he's just waiting until he gets to the 8,000th song to write and maybe it's taking him, he listens to 1,000 songs a year.
Joe, I have no illusions because, when I actually think about how technology has changed so much, even in those 8 years, that he probably couldn't charge the thing anymore unless he had the cord, because the iPod charging cord was like that, and now the iPhone cords are like that, and unless you have the right cord, what are you going to do?
Right, yeah, that is a hassle. Okay, well, you said you had these three, Bart Starr, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. Now you got these three awesome personalized photographs that you got up in your house. I got to ask, well, where's the Don Mikowski one? Or Lynn Dickey?
I've met Lynn Dickey. I've never met Don Mikowski. That's the interesting thing about, and this drives my wife crazy. I don't like to throw away anything. And if you were like, walk back in my studio here and open up a closet, it's kind of like out of a sitcom. Stuff's going to fall down on you. Yeah. And I mean, there are tons of things I have from all these decades, of radio and meeting people and getting things signed, etc. That unless there is, with all due respect to Mr. Mikowski and Dickey and even Jordan Love, I mean, there's some moment that it translates to, it doesn't mean as much. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I think I mentioned this in the book. I was at an event with Brett Favre, and at that point, I'll admit to you that this is the great, again, just a regular guy, but in the intersection, back when that happened in the 90s, when the business world was exploding, and here I am in commercial real estate, a lucrative field, and, radio and sports and all of that, I had some disposable income that I was spending unwisely. I bought a game-used Joe Montana 49ers helmet. I'm not a fan of the 49ers. So I don't even know where it is right now. But, I'm buying things like that just because you could. Yeah. And, at that moment, my son must have been maybe 7, 8 years old at the time. And I had him with me. And Brett kneels down and starts talking to my son, and he's patting him on the back, and they're joking around. No signature, no photo. But that moment meant more than any of the memorabilia that I was buying at the time, and I never bought anything after that. Now, that same day, and I'll leave the story as a tease for anybody in my book, Brett Favre and his Killed Mississippi buddies tried to do shots with my 8-year-old son, but that's a whole nother story. But the memorable moment that I walked out of on that day was the fact that meant so much more to me than anything I could ever buy, and never bought anything again.
Yeah, absolutely. I got one last Packers thing for you. I just wanted to show you this. It's not really a question. I just thought you'd get a kick out of it. So have you seen this record before?
Yeah, I've got that.
Okay. So, I can see how many you got behind you. But so the funny thing about this was I bought this on Facebook Marketplace last year for $5, and I bought it because it was, you can see that's autographed by Ted Moore. Can you see that?
Wow, that's awesome.
Okay, now are you ready for me to blow your mind?
Yeah. No way!
I guess the guy who had this before me was also named Steve.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah. I'll have to, maybe we can make a trade for it or something. But
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let me see what kind of Joe stuff I have. Sure.
oh, there you go. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I'll tell you a quick thing about that album.
Yeah.
Yeah. The introduction to my radio show was done. I put it together 33 years ago when I started the show. That's one thing that's never changed, is the open of that show. And it includes a clip from that album of some Packer play-by-play.
This is Rock and Roll Roots with Steve Palec.
Takes the ball, hands off to Hunting.
Fast forward, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and I get a call from somebody at a radio station in Milwaukee that said, hey, you're using our play-by-play. That, the old thing that you hear at the beginning of every sporting event about, the unauthorized use of this. They tried, and said, that came from our radio station. I'm like, I'm out. That came from the album.
Yeah.
Packers put out. So, nice try.
Oh man, wow! I'd still be terrified if the NFL was, on my phone.
Okay, well, hey, on the topic of the records, and we can see at least part of your record collection behind you, and I know you post on your YouTube channel sort of a tour of your very impressive collection. Do you have a number? What's your best guess on how many records you have?
I would probably estimate the whole thing at about 10,000. But it's not as impressive as it sounds because of the duration of the time that I've been getting albums, but even more importantly, the different ways that I've gotten albums throughout my life. I mean, it started like a lot of people of our generation that sent away to get 11 albums for a penny, and then you subscribe to Columbia House, and all of a sudden, you're getting these, $80 albums that, every trick in the book that goes back to those days of like using a middle initial that's different than your own, so they can't track you down. I mean, it started that way. And then when I was in high school, I actually was doing radio commercials for a record store, and they paid me in albums, 5, 6, 7 of them a week. And in exchange for doing those commercials, I got to go into the record store and take home like 3 albums a week. Then, working in radio stations, I just started grabbing them whenever they were laying around. And then that translated to the most recent thing, which was when vinyl fell out of favor. A lot of people were saying to me, hey, I'm getting rid of all my albums. Do you want them? And every time I said yes. So I can't ever get to the point where I can't leave room for more albums, because they still come. And I'm still able to get them. And it's just so cool.
Yeah, I started collecting records about 10 years ago. And when I started, prices on them were pretty reasonable if you go to like thrift stores or used bookstores. And over the last 10 years, that has slowly evaporated because so many people have gotten into collecting it. Unfortunately, that's the pain of when a hobby gets popular. But I guess you got a hell of a head start with what's behind you.
You just put your finger on the key to collecting stuff. The key is, and you can't plan it, but the best thing is to be out ahead of the curve. So, I was getting all these albums before I knew vinyl would have an importance. Then when CDs came out, I was like trying to find CDs to replicate the albums that I had. And I had the most fun going into record stores and, finding a CD that I wanted to replace an album. And then, my third obsession with collecting became bourbon. And luckily I was out ahead of that, because now there are so many rare bourbons that it took the fun out of it. But one thing I really can relate to, and it's helped me in relationships, and that is I never complain when I'm with a woman in a shoe store and I have to just sit there and wait while they look at hundreds of shoes, because it's the same feeling that I had in a record store or in a CD store.
Lessons like that you're going to learn in this book. I love it. Okay, so staying on the music, we're going to pivot now, because another thing besides record collecting that I think you and I have in common is we both see a lot of concerts. Unfortunately, not this year. Any guesses on a number of how many concerts you've attended over the years?
Wow, no. I mean, I don't think I could do it with a gun held to my head. I mean, again, and they just fall into these different categories of, concerts I was lucky to go to before I even got into radio, the things that I've been lucky enough to be a part of and either work at or attend, etc. But a sheer number, it's immaterial to me.
I know you are a huge fan of John Prine. And I've listened, I remember a number of years ago you did a root salute on your show to John Prine, and I was driving home, I was listening to it in the car, and I wasn't familiar with him. And you played I'm Taking a Walk by John Prine.
Yeah.
And I had got to my house and I was about to get out of the car, but I had to stop and listen to the end of it because I've never heard a song like that before.
I'm taking a walk. I'm going outside.
Because it just seemed so beautiful that he would write a song about just going outside and taking a walk. Which is something we all do, and it's just like, there should be a song like this. And I really liked it. So I think John Prine's a cool guy, and I think you're a great advocate for him on the radio, because he really doesn't have a lot of commercial radio hits, right?
Right, and the thing about John Prine is it goes back to what I was saying earlier about sincerity. I once asked him if he's ever thought about releasing an instrumental. Because, there's a melodic aspect to his music that I really like. He said, there is one tune I have in my head that I never came up with words, so maybe I'd have to, but he never had. And it's really because, he had so much to say in such a unique way. And if there is anybody listening to this that's not familiar with John Prine, you owe it to yourself to just grab whatever you can find and just listen to it. Not in the background. Now, you can if you want. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But if you would, please, just listen to what he says in each and every one of his songs. And some are deep and some are fun and everything in between. But it's just such a great example of sincerity that came through, which amplifies what you're saying. Because you know what? If I write a song about taking a walk, I'll guarantee you it will bore the hell out of you. But John Prine can.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the best stories in your book is about the first time you heard his music at Summerfest, because I think it speaks to just a moment that everyone who considers themselves like a music fan and also open to new music, if you're at like a music festival, it's got to be a common thread where you have a moment where you hear something and you just got to stop and be like, wait, what is this? And absorb that in and then find out who this artist is, and nothing in that moment is more important.
Right. And one of the things I'd say about that, Joe, is, and again, there is no right and wrong. You can like anything you want, and nobody should ever tell you what to like or why. But the interesting thing to me about John Prine is the first time I heard him just strolling through Summerfest, and I stopped like a cartoon character, like, what is this? That was when, if you had asked me what genre of music do I like, country would have never seeped into it. Country or folk or whatever you want to call it. And boy, was I lucky to have discovered him without prejudicial of like, oh, I'm not supposed to like that because it's not Led Zeppelin. And it's the same thing. I remember and by the way, Steve Dahl?
Oh, yeah, Chicago, right? Disco
right.
Demolition Night?
Chicago, right, exactly. That's where I was going with it. Although, I think of Steve Dahl, and I'll never forget the words he told me, which were some of the most important words of advice I ever got on radio. But he was the guy that, was on the air, one of the first shock jocks, brilliant, hated disco.
Right.
And, but at the same time, I mean, if you listen to Fleetwood Mac, Go Your Own Way, Lindsey Buckingham is emulating the Bee Gees in that song, and he tell you that.
Yeah.
So again, to be limited by genres it's only limiting yourself. But as long as I brought it up, I should tell you the words of advice I got from Steve Dahl. He told me, how can you, in radio, have a fake name, a fake voice, and use a fake personality and ever expect to communicate with people? Fake name, fake voice, fake personality, and you think you're going to communicate? And boy, that was a powerful piece of advice.
That's certainly not, not the formula for a lot of morning zoo shows, I take it.
Oh, yeah.
So, since you brought him up, I wasn't going to ask you, but you mentioned him. That Disco Demolition Night, were you on the radio when that happened?
No, I was still,
okay.
I was part-time. I was doing sports part-time. Actually, which is how I got to meet Steve Dahl, because he had a syndicated show that was on in Milwaukee, QFM, and his morning syndicated show. And I was doing sports reports for a couple different radio stations, just like 1 minute morning updates on sports that I'd pre-recorded the night before. And so my sports reports were inserted into Steve Dahl's morning radio show.
Oh, nice. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you remember what it was like hearing about Disco Demolition Night? Was it like funny, or was it cringy, or like what was like the general feel of how that happened? Because there's been in the years since, there's been a lot of people who've revisited it, and there's been some criticism of it, and there's been some sort of celebration of it. What was it like at the time?
That's a great question, because in retrospect, it seems absurd.
Yeah.
For a baseball purist,
Oh,
I was, I didn't want anything, 162 games have to be played. And they go into the statistics that get compared to everything that's been happening for 100 years. And as a baseball purist, how do you justify affecting the statistical aspect of a championship season? That's how I felt.
wow.
But look at it now, and I think, what, you idiot? Don't you have anything better to worry about? And then also at the time, it was, not to politicize it, but, now I can see how people get manipulated by whatever source they choose for their news or for their perspective on life. Because I was living in that anti-disco era. I mean, I was raised on rock and roll and the purity of rock and roll, and I didn't want anything to do with disco. I didn't want any aspect of it seeping into my persona. But I look back on it and realize, you know what? one of the earliest disco songs was the Hughes Corporation, Rock the Boat.
Oh, yeah.
It's an infectious, fun song. And why did I decide not to enjoy any aspect of that? You know what? Casey and the Sunshine Band, I'm not going to have it played at my wedding, but I will tell you this, that, you know, if I hear it, I'm not going to throw up. And in that era when it came out, I probably would have tried to act like I did want to regurgitate.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you know, shame on me for, you know, not being open to any type of music, because it's a tried and true saying, but there are only two types of music, good and bad. You're the judge of it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Where, like, you know, it doesn't matter how much you think you don't like a certain genre, something from it might get into your brain, and you're just it's like refusing to eat a piece of food, or I don't know, breathe air in a certain room. You know, you're withholding from yourself for no real reason.
Right, and you know, you remind me of really how lucky I am to have a 3-hour radio show on a major market station with total freedom, because I don't take it for granted. I don't. If I were, you know, feeding you a meal, it wouldn't be all dessert, even though I might like that. You know, I do have to serve, you know, the various food groups, and so I don't abuse it. I still have this inherent guilt that's wired deep inside of me, that, oh my God, I can't believe I'm playing this. I did a segment recently of songs that say, oh yeah. And so I've got the Beatles, She Loves You. Yeah. REM, Man on the Moon. And Tommy James and the Shondells. But, you know, I thought about Yellow, oh yeah, from the Ferris Bueller movies. And, you know, I'm playing that, and, you know, I'm looking around, and I'm in the studio at KLH, and there's a Springsteen picture, Beatles, Rolling Stones. I know the core of the music that the station plays, and I have a tinge of guilt by playing, oh yeah, and, you know, and listening to it. But you know what? It just works, and that guilt that I have is amplified by certain people that think that every genre should be limiting. It shouldn't be. I mean, I should be able to enjoy Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, followed by Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, and I think radio, one of its strengths is that it does have the ability to filter in incrementally music that people aren't used to or aren't familiar with in between all their comfort food of music. You know, that's what I think a good radio show would be. That's why I like your show, because, like, generally I know a lot of the songs you play, and I love a lot of the songs you play, but I know every week I'm going to hear something new, you know, and I might love that too, you know, like I'm taking a walk, you know.
Well, at the risk of sounding like a dinosaur, the best part of growing up in the 60s was top 40 radio, 70s as well. Before everything started going into silos, imagine, you know, hearing Glenn Campbell next to the Rolling Stones, and it all worked. I remember, you know, listening to, you know, a song like, Beatles Revolution, and then followed by Charlie Rich. The most, hey, did you happen to see the most beautiful girl in the world? When would I have ever heard that song? But somehow it just worked.
It's funny. Yeah, you're right. That's something that, unfortunately, my generation sort of misses out on. I got some roots questions for you now. One of the stories in your book was you interviewed Willie Dixon from Chess Records and all, you know, the great blues man. I think that's probably an underrated story in your book. because that dude is hugely important in music, and he's not necessarily a household name. What did you think of Willie personally? And then after that, have you been down to Chicago to the old Chess Records?
No, I haven't. And I'll confess to you that when I sat down with Willie Dixon, I didn't know as much about him as I do now. And that's, one thing I'm proud of is, if I do an interview, I never mail it in. I always try to think about, where do I want to go? Where do I have the best bet of getting someone to open up and talk about things, etc. And, but I also subscribe to the Larry King philosophy that you don't want to ever be over-prepared, because you want to ask the questions that people want to know. And as someone that's not, an expert. So when I sat down with Willie Dixon, I knew he was behind a lot of songs that I took for granted, the list of people that have covered his music is just crazy, from Van Morrison to the Doors to the Stones and on, Allman Brothers. So we ended up talking about, songs and music in his background. The one thing I knew that you kind of allude to is, the guy was there really at the birth of rock and roll, right? Because Chuck Berry was from St. Louis. Chuck Berry had a lot more twang and country into his music than people knew when he started being there at the onset of rock and roll. It was Chuck Berry going to Chess Records in Chicago to record that caused Willie Dixon and the guys in the studio to say, hey, put some blues behind what you're doing. And there's that marriage of blues and country and soul and swing and all of that really birthed rock and roll. So Willie Dixon was there at the onset. But it's kind of like, the first time I talked to Les Paul, I knew, this guy's a household name, but you really don't know the tangents and all the different paths that, you could go down with one of these legends. Willie Dixon, by the way, was one where we actually sat together in a studio. So as I mentioned earlier, I made him wait while I played songs, and it's just awkward, to sit there with a guy. You're listening to, a Led Zeppelin song that, by the way, that helped paid for, a lot of the things he did later in life, because Whole Lot of Love, it was just a total ripoff of a Dixon song. But, we're sitting in a studio there together. What do I do while I'm listening to Genius?
Speaking on all those interviews you've done over the years, there has to be a couple that stick out. Who do you remember being the most fun to talk to, that you wish that you could have just kept going on even after they had to leave?
It reminds me of something else, but I'll answer your question and amplify it, because there have been instances where I've talked to people and they were different at varying times.
Oh, okay.
One that came to mind, one of the opportunities that blew me away early in my radio career was when Graham Nash visited a station that I was at, and we were talking and goofing around, and there was a golf club and a couple of golf balls sitting in the hallway, and we just started playing down the hallway. And then I had the occasion to interview him after that, and he couldn't have been any nicer and more insightful. And then I interviewed him a third time, and he was polite and cooperative, but it just wasn't the same. And it just struck me that, you have to be really, really careful when you're interviewing and meeting your heroes, because they'll often let you down, and they'll often blow you away. But when you interview them multiple times, you just get reminded of the fact that we're all just, people, and you don't know what's going on in someone's life. Dave Mason, I've loved his music, from the day I discovered Traffic and his solo work. And, I've talked to him 4 times, and 2 have been like going to the dentist, and 2 of them have been great. And, so that's what strikes me, Joe, is that, there have been so many, that have been off the charts. Getting to actually be in a room with Ringo Starr, to Frank Zappa, who I embarrassed myself in front of because that was one of my very first interviews, and I wasn't prepared for it, and everything in between. So I still am in awe, but I carry with me that awe of just being a regular guy and understanding that they're regular guys too.
Oh, for sure. Okay, that's interesting that there can be a disparity from just time to time. Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Was there anybody that sticks out that like had all of the like you said, talking, pulling teeth aspect, and none of the positive flip side? Was there ever an interview that you came truly prepared and feeling good about, and whoever you were talking to just wasn't really into it, or you were just giving you a hard time? Because I know that some celebrities have an ego problem, and they'll just be difficult, and they kind of get off on it.
Yeah, there have been few and far between. The Frank Zappa, as I referenced, in the baseball world, and I tell the story in the book, Carl Yastrzemski he was tough on me. I interviewed him at his locker, and he was smoking, and he blew the smoke right into my face. Every single exhale went right into my face, and that was obviously not accidental. But I will tell you, those are truly the exceptions. Yeah. The thing and this was in retrospect, I didn't think of this until I actually sat down and worked on the book. One of the luckiest parts of my education, and I got into the world of business after radio, and then worked on those 2 things simultaneously. It was starting as a sportscaster, going into locker rooms, and being able to read the room served me so well in life, in so many situations. You go into a locker room after a game to get audio, or if you're, in the days I was doing it, we were the bastards because it was the writers that were most important, and we were viewed as amateurs with a recorder. But if you're going into a locker room day after day, especially baseball as an example, they may have a 10-game homestand, and you're there every single day. Win, loss, weird, mundane, anything can happen, and it's going to be different every day. The atmosphere is not going to be the same in that locker room, and it's going to change from team to team, month to month, situation to situation. And so being able to read the room is really, really important. And it's the same way in an interview. Again, you don't know if that person's had a bad day. You rightly point out that there are some people that get off on, treating you like that. Yeah. But they're few and far between. More often than not, it's going to be a result of how do you start with them? What kind of mood are they in? And, are you just handing them a DMV test questions that they have to pick off, or are you actually, really engaging them in something?
Very good. Okay.
So one of the interviews you did that I want to highlight, because I really enjoyed it, was your conversation a couple years ago with Bill Maher. And I guess maybe this, affected my last question, because Bill Maher, I am a huge fan of. But he has sort of a reputation for being kind of condescending, and weirdly humorless. Sometimes that comes through on a show. But your interview with him, none of that came through. Like, you really seemed to get out, like, his best side, especially when you were talking baseball. Like, he seemed really happy to talk to you.
When you're here, May 5th, it's a Sunday night at the Riverside. Do you know what's going on here Sunday afternoon?
I hope something that's not a terrible bit of competition for me.
No, it may be something you want to include. The Brewers are hosting the Mets.
No, are you kidding?
No.
The Mets, that's funny because I am seeing the Brewers play the Mets this Sunday.
Is that right?
How did that interview come together? How did you enjoy that process, and did you talk to him afterwards?
Yes. Yeah, I enjoyed it and talked to him afterwards. I mean, I enjoyed every aspect of that. And at the end of the interview, as often happens, especially with someone that's coming to town, they always say, oh, come on backstage or let's meet. And with Bill Maher, I thought we really hit it off, and I truly enjoyed talking to him. And I get a call like 2 weeks later from his assistant. Yeah, Bill wanted to make a point of making sure that you guys got together, in Milwaukee. So we did. But to answer your question about how that came about, it's really timely because it's, in retrospect, as I think about the hundreds of people that I've had the opportunity to interview, a great majority of them came about because of people that are hurting right now. They came about because of the Peter Jest at Shank Hall, the Gary Witts at the Pabst and the Riverside, that are the people responsible for bringing so many of these people to town. And, they're friends. And I really enjoy his HBO show because no matter what you may think of him, he has the truth, and that is he makes you think. He will tell you what he thinks. You may not agree with him every time, but it's thought-provoking. He's never mundane. And he was a great interview, and we had a real conversation, and we really wanted to talk to each other afterwards.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I just have two more questions. One's an easy one, hopefully, and one's tough. So here's the easy thing, and this one comes from my dad, by the way. So your show, KLH Sunday mornings, Rock and Roll Roots with Steve Palec. Who stole the name, you or Bob Stroud?
That's a great question. When I first started the show, I'd gotten out of radio full time, and I was immersed in learning commercial real estate. And I mean, I felt like I had to be a total sponge and totally focus on learning that really, really specialized field. And so I just gave up all radio, and KLH kept coming to me saying, you want to do a show, you want to do something, you want to do something. And I was turning down everything. And finally they said, okay, tell you what, we'll give you a 3-hour show and you will have total freedom. You can play whatever you want. And I mean, that's unheard of. And they only dictated one thing to me. And it's probably a stronger word to use than their intent, because if I would have objected, they probably would have acquiesced. But they said, the name of the show is Rock and Roll Roots, and we want you to have a Roots Salute artist. Aside from the time, the 9 to noon slot, those were the only things they said to me. It's called Rock and Roll Roots. You have a Roots Salute artist. I'm like, yeah, cool. I readily admit, if you heard the first year of that show, it doesn't sound anything like it does now. It's obviously evolved over decades, but it was always just handed to me to do what I want. About a year or two into it, I got a scathing letter. And this shows you how old the show is, because there was no email at the time. So this scathing letter accused me of stealing the show from Bob Stroud in Chicago, who I didn't even know. And I didn't know how to process it. And I got another one a little while after that. I'm now aware of that, and Bob's still doing that show. I've never met him, I've never talked to him, and I'm sure I'm not even on his radar screen. And back then, you got a lot of scathing letters about all kinds of stuff. Back then, there were people like policing your grammar and correcting you. I'll never forget, I got the vitriol of this person who was so offended that I featured the band America as a root salute on a rock station. I mean, they were so upset that I still to this day feel bad for them. But I was accused of stealing it, but that's really the truth. Is those were the two things that were dictated, and sometimes I regret it because I didn't want anyone to accuse me of plagiarism, but that's those two shows have been parallel for over 30 years. Yeah, and obviously it hasn't hurt either of us.
Right. Maybe a friendly competition. I'm surprised you two haven't met. It seems like you run in the same circles.
Yeah, that's the thing about radio is, if we're in two different cities, but when I do remember some days, like for example, the WQFM and WLPX battles were legendary. But it never really got to me because in radio you get so used to people getting fired and format changes and shifts that pretty much you're going to work with everybody at some point. So I never saw any reason to hate anybody.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, then here's the heavy question, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, but you've been in the business for well over 30 years. All of it on FM radio, right?
No.
Okay.
Especially in my sportscasting days, I did some AM stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, you're on FM now, and the format has changed so much over these years. What do you project FM radio will be in the future, and what do you think is coming down this stretch?
Well, I don't really know, and I don't really care that much because things are moving so quickly. And listen, I'd be really sad if someone told me, okay, you can't do your show next week. But I'd also be accepting because things change and nothing lasts forever. My best guess would be to focus on two things if you're trying to get out ahead. And they would be demand and device, because all of us, are slowly or quickly or anything in between becoming used to getting what we want when we want it. And you control your own media. If you want something, you want it now. That's the scary part about radio. Terrestrial radio that's live is, I bet a lot of people would like to hear something I did or am going to do, but it doesn't fit into their life unless they get it when they want it.
Right.
So the future lies in demand. The future also lies in an openness to whatever the device is. Anything from the fact that we use our phones the way that people in the Wild West carried their guns in their holster. You can't be limited by what the device is. And you have to be open to, whatever that may be, even including, a chip in someone's head that they just go, okay, I want to hear Tom Waits right now.
Right.
So I think it's those two things that you just have to be open to understanding that, none of us really knows what those aspects are going to be. But the third I'd add to demand and device would be content. And that is, I have no illusions that you can't listen to whatever song you want, any way you want it, anywhere you want to get it, whenever you want. But, hopefully if you want a story behind the song or a comment or a context for it, that is where the content comes in. And that's where I hope that the future brings those three things together in such a way that still allows me to do what I really want to do, which is share the joy of this stuff. Whether it's a joke, a story, or a song, there's no substitute for that feeling you get when you say to someone, hey, I heard a song I love, I want you to hear it. And that's what this book really is about. It's about that feeling that you get when, if I share a song with you, Joe, and you're ambivalent, I don't feel good. But if I share a song with you and you like it, and we both like it, I'm in awe of that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I know how that feels. I know what you're talking about. That's got to be the whole appeal of being on radio at its core.
That's the best part of it.
Yeah. Can you tease what the next couple of Roots episodes you got planned?
Honestly, right now I'm out ahead like 3 or 4 weeks. Just because, whenever the motivation strikes me is when I just start preparing things. Yeah. But I don't even remember. I have no idea what I'm doing next week. I got, basically the show it's like a roadmap. So I'll have, a featured artist. I'll have 3 subjects. I'll have more songs and interview clips than I'll ever get to use. But it's all extemporaneous. So when I go in on Sunday, the preparation I've done weeks before allows me to go in and make it up on the spot.
Very cool.
And what do I use, what I don't use? I couldn't remember. I could go in the back in the studio and pull it out, but I don't even know who I'm featuring next week.
Wow. So it is truly, that is still that magic of live radio.
Yeah.
That's something that terrifies me. just to think about it.
People ask me all the time. The question I get the most is it live? And it's absolutely live because I would be bored to death if I walked into a studio and pre-recorded a show. And I would also be tempted to cover up every mistake.
Right.
Now, you're really good at that. That's why I'm comfortable, because I've seen your editing work, and I know that earlier in this podcast, I was trying to say preface or something, and I totally stumbled. I know that'll never show up in the finished product.
Oh, now it will.
I am going to take advantage of preferencing. I'm going to take advantage of giving you a long-winded answer.
Great.
But that if I were to pre-record a show, it would be unenjoyable for me.
Yeah, that is the only true downside for me, for my style of podcasting, is when I record it, I have to go through the whole audio file and cut out every stop and start sentence and every and then I feel like an idiot for talking like that. So there's pros and cons to both, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, real cool. Well, then my last question on Roots is, I would hate to even bring up the R word, but there's no end in sight for Roots, right? There's no retirement on the horizon. Or is that something you thought of?
Well, I'm at an age right now where, I can't help but think about retirement. And I've been really lucky that I have come to the recognition that the best definition of retirement is getting to do what you want. It's not having a job or not having a purpose. It's really just getting to do the things you like to do. And so I realized that I have that right now. So why would I be so quick to, undermine that? And I can't control what I can't control. So like I said, I'm very cognizant of the fact that without sponsors or with a format change, it just could be gone tomorrow in terms of radio as well as the other aspects of my life. But I do have the best of all those worlds right now. Everything I'm doing, I enjoy doing, except for one thing. And that one thing may be what drives me to a more traditional sense of retirement. For the first time in my long, long life, I despise shoveling snow. So that's
man.
starting to think about is, and that's why there's good and bad in everything. And the good in global warming may mean that, I can stay in Wisconsin if our climate changes drastically. But that's the one thing that's starting to get to me.
I don't know if you know Steve Zabin over on 97.3. I listen to his sports show, and he lives in D.C., and he talks all the time about moving out to Arizona with the dry heat so he doesn't have to shovel or deal with humidity or crappy weather.
Yep. That's what's going through my head.
Okay, well then maybe if that happens, you get an online version of Roots. But hey, I gotta say. Go ahead.
Let's cheer for global warming now.
Yeah, hey, how about it? Melted ice right here. Awesome. Well, as you said to Bill Maher, I want so much for you to like me and for us to be friends. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. And, I've seen your work, and it's awesome stuff.
I appreciate that, Steve, and I hope everybody listening, especially Milwaukeeans and Wisconsinites, go out, get this book, and then listen to your show on Sundays. It's the best Milwaukee radio has to offer, and it's so much great stuff for a music fan. So it was real awesome talking to you today. I hope I can have you back sometime. I didn't even get to all the concert stuffs I know we've both been to.
All right, let's do it again.
And that was my conversation with Steve Palec, author of In Awe, Beatles, Baseball, and Bourbon, and the host of Rock and Roll Roots on Sunday mornings on 96.5 WKLH here in Milwaukee. I want to thank Steve for being such a great guest, and even beyond that, I'd like to thank him for being such a great advocate for the music I love and the music all rock fans love here in Milwaukee. His show is, without question, the best radio show in the Milwaukee area, and again, I'd stack that up against any show, especially because he airs it live. It's not pre-recorded, although if you listen to it, you would probably think otherwise. It was really fun to talk to him, and it means a lot to me that he came on the show. Hopefully we'll get him back again soon. So if I haven't been clear enough, if you're a fan of rock and roll, if you're interested in the behind the scenes of FM radio, or if you live in Milwaukee, or if you've spent a lot of time in Milwaukee, I would really, really recommend getting this book. It's a very enjoyable read, very accessible, lots of great stories. And if you'd like to learn more about the book, go to his website, stevepalec.com, or his YouTube channel, where there's some trailers for the book, and also follow him on social media, at Steve Palec on Twitter. Now, once you have his book and you've followed him on social media, please remember the big 4 things that cost $0 that you can do to help this show. 1, listen to the show. If you're at this part of the interview, hey, guess what? You already did step 1, and thank you for that. 2, recommend the show to family and friends or anyone you know who's looking for a podcast about rock and roll. 3, find me on social media, at Play That Podcast on Twitter, Play That Rock and Roll on Facebook, although you can find us if you search Play That Podcast, all one word, and on YouTube, youtube.com/c/Play That Rock and Roll. So please like, follow, and subscribe. That's very much appreciated on this end. And 4th, if you have a moment, please give us a positive rating and a nice review over on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. We should be on every major podcast platform by now, and if we're not on the platform that you use, please drop me a line and let me know. I'll get the show on there ASAP. And if we are on the platform you use, please take a moment and give us just a rating or a review. That stuff is so important for a new show, which we absolutely are. The show is still less than a year old, so any ratings and reviews are very much appreciated. So if you take a moment to do that, thank you very much. And thanks again for listening. Glad you tuned in. And since we spoke about him earlier, we'll play the show out in memoriam to John Prine.
Milwaukee, here I come from Nashville, Tennessee. Milwaukee is where we were before we came here, working in a brewery, making the finest beer.
For once, don't listen to me. Listen to Joe K on Play That Rock and Roll. Okay, now you can come back.
To the Grand Ole Opry. I'm gonna get on the old turnpike and I'm gonna ride. I'm gonna leave this town till you decide which one you want the most. Those opera stars or me. Milwaukee, here I come from Nashville, Tennessee.